Captain Marcus Holt pressed his back against the shattered concrete and counted his people again. 12 Rangers. 3 days trapped. The number never changed no matter how many times he ran it through his head. The collapsed building had become their tomb. What remained of the second floor created a jagged ceiling above them, rebar fingers reaching down through dust that never seemed to settle. Holt could see daylight through 7 different gaps in the structure, and each one represented a firing lane that would kill anyone who crossed it. Sergeant First Class Torres lay against the far wall, his leg wrapped in blood-soaked bandages that Specialist Reyes had changed twice since dawn. The wound had stopped bleeding, but infection was setting in. Holt could see it in the way Torres's skin had gone gray, the way sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. 40% ammunition, maybe 2 days of water if they ration hard. 3 wounded who needed evacuation yesterday. Holt keyed his radio and kept his voice low. Viper 6 to Actual, requesting status update on extraction options. Major Chen's voice came back through static. Viper 6, we have completed drone analysis of your sector. I need you to understand what we're dealing with. Holt listened as Chen laid out the intelligence. 8 enemy snipers had established positions in a perfect ring around their location. Elevated buildings, reinforced structures, overlapping fields of fire. Every extraction route ran through at least 2 kill zones. The enemy had taken their time setting this trap, and they had set it well. 8 shooters, Holt said. Professional placement. Chen confirmed. We believe foreign-trained. Possibly advisors. They knew exactly what they were doing when they positioned themselves. There is no gap in their coverage. The radio crackled with distant rotor wash. Holt moved to a crack in the wall and pressed his eye to the narrow opening. A Black Hawk was coming in low from the east, Dorganer scanning for targets. He had seen this before, twice in the past 2 days. The helicopter banked hard, beginning its approach to the open ground 300 meters north of their position. Holt watched the Dorganer open fire on a rooftop, suppressing what he thought was the threat. The first round punched through the Black Hawk's tail, rotor, housing from a completely different direction. The second came from somewhere else entirely. The pilot fought for control as the aircraft shuddered and pulled away, trailing smoke as it retreated over the ridge. Third attempt. Third failure. Holt turned away from the gap. His Rangers watched him with eyes that held questions he could not answer. Rodriguez and Mills had positioned themselves near the wounded, rifles ready for a ground assault that might come at any moment. Chen was rationing the remaining water into careful portions that would keep them alive long enough to die of something else. Reyes appeared at Holt's shoulder. Captain, I need to talk to you about Torres. Holt followed the medic to where Torres lay. The sergeant's eyes were closed, but his breathing was rapid and shallow. Reyes pulled back the bandage to reveal the wound beneath. Angry red spreading outward from the entry point, dark lines tracing up toward the hip. Sepsis, Reyes said. The round fragmented inside. I got most of the pieces out, but not all. He needs surgery. Holt processed this. Timeline, 36 hours. Maybe 40 if he is lucky. After that, the infection reaches his organs, and there is nothing anyone can do. Torres opened his eyes. His voice came out cracked and dry. Captain, do not let them risk another helicopter for me. Holt gripped the sergeant's shoulder. Nobody is writing anybody off. We're getting out of here. He moved back to the radio position and keyed the handset. Actual, this is Viper 6. I have a critical casualty with a 36-hour window. What are our options? Chen's pause told him everything he needed to know before she spoke. Viper 6, we are working on alternatives. Colonel Mercer is evaluating a ground assault, but timeline is 72 hours minimum for force assembly. Torres does not have 72 hours. I understand. We are exploring every option available. Holt wanted to ask what that meant. He wanted to demand specifics, timelines, names of people who were going to get his Rangers out of this concrete coffin. But he had been in the Army long enough to recognize the sound of someone who had no good answers. Chen spoke again. Hold your position. Conserve ammunition and water. We will contact you when we have something concrete. The radio went silent. Holt looked around at his 12 Rangers, at the wounded men against the wall, at the dust falling through broken beams. Somewhere out there, 8 enemy snipers waited with infinite patience. 36 hours. That was how long Torres had. That was how long all of them had before the enemy realized they could simply wait for thirst and infection to do what bullets had not. Holt settled against the wall and began the count again. 12 Rangers. 3 wounded. 8 snipers. 0 options. The math never worked out in their favor. Major Sarachon stood before the tactical display and watched the faces of the men who would decide whether 12 Rangers lived or died. The operations center hummed with equipment and tension, screens casting blue light across uniforms and coffee cups gone cold. She pulled up the drone imagery. 8 positions marked in red formed a nearly perfect circle around the trapped unit's location. Each marker represented a trained sniper with overlapping fields of fire. These are not insurgents with rifles, Chen said. The placement is too precise. They have created interlocking kill zones that cover every possible extraction route. We believe they are foreign-trained, possibly advisory personnel embedded with local forces. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Mercer leaned back in his chair. His silver oak leaves caught the light as he shook his head. So what are you recommending, Major? A drone strike on 8 separate hardened positions in an urban environment. Chun kept her voice level. I am presenting the intelligence picture, sir. Options are your determination. Mercer waved his hand at the screen. A strike package would require 8 separate munitions with danger close protocols. The collateral damage assessment alone would take 48 hours. And the Rangers are within fragmentation radius of at least 3 of those positions. Command Sergeant Major Patterson spoke from the corner. What about a ground assault? Mercer nodded as if this confirmed his thinking. That is the viable option. But we need to assemble sufficient force to overwhelm all 8 positions simultaneously. 72 hours minimum for force assembly and staging. The trapped unit has a critical casualty, Chen said. 36-hour window before he is unrecoverable. Mercer's expression did not change. Then we push the timeline as hard as we can. But I'm not sending more people into a kill box without overwhelming force. The door to the operations center opened. Staff Sergeant Elena Vega stepped inside, and the room's attention shifted to her. She wore the patch of a support operations unit on her shoulder, and she carried a tablet displaying the same drone imagery that filled the main screen. Before you know it, wherever you are watching from right now, you have already made assumptions about the woman who just walked into that room. Maybe based on her unit patch, maybe based on her rank, maybe based on something else entirely. That is how it works. People get positioned in categories, and everyone assumes they know what that position means. Vega crossed to the display without waiting for acknowledgement. I have been analyzing the drone footage for the past 6 hours. I can eliminate all 8 targets within the 36-hour window. Mercer's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Excuse me, Staff Sergeant. Who authorized you to be in this briefing? I authorized myself, sir. Those are my people out there. Mercer stood. His height advantage over Vega was considerable, and he used it. Your people. You are attached to support operations. You are a ranged shooter who has never taken a shot that mattered in combat. And you are telling me you can do what 3 helicopter crews and our entire tactical planning section cannot. Vega met his eyes without flinching. I am telling you, there is a vulnerability in their positioning that your tactical section missed because they were looking at the problem wrong. She touched her tablet and the main display shifted. The 8 red markers remained, but now a blue line traced a path from the eastern ridge through the sniper positions. They position themselves to cover the Rangers, Vega said. Every firing lane points inward, but they're not covering each other. If I approach from the eastern ridge, I can engage them in sequence. Each kill opens the angle for the next shot. 8 targets, 8 shots, specific order. Mercer crossed his arms. 1 sniper against 8. That is your plan. 1 sniper they will not see coming. 1 sniper approaching from a direction they're not watching. They build a trap for a rescue force. They did not build a trap for a single shooter coming from behind. Patterson stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of 30 years in uniform. Staff Sergeant, what are your qualifications for this mission? Vega turned to face him. 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments in support operations. Longest confirmed shot at 2,100 meters. Trained at the Army Marksmanship Unit before transfer to operational duty. Patterson's expression shifted. Something that had been skepticism became calculation. 47 kills in support operations. Chen understood what Patterson was recognizing. Support operations was where certain missions went to stay quiet, where certain shooters went when their work was not meant to appear in official combat statistics. Mercer saw Patterson's reaction and his jaw tightened. I do not care if she has 100 kills on paper. This is a combat sniper mission requiring combat sniper certification. She is support personnel. Vega's voice did not rise, but something in it hardened. Those 12 Rangers have 36 hours. Your ground assault takes 72. Your drone strikes take longer. I'm offering you an option that works within the window you actually have. And when you fail, Mercer said, it sets women in combat roles back 20 years. If I fail, Vega answered, 12 Rangers die. That is what actually matters. Not your politics. Not your categories. 12 lives against 8 shots. I can make those shots. The room went quiet. Chen watched Patterson studying Vega with new eyes. Watched Mercer's face reddening with anger and something that might have been fear. Fear that she might be right. Fear that his objections might cost lives. Vega stood alone in the center of the room, waiting for an answer that would determine whether she got the chance to prove what she already knew. She could make those shots. She had always been able to make the shots that mattered. The question was whether anyone would let her try. Mercer's decision came fast and final. Request denied, Staff Sergeant. You lack combat sniper certification and your operational designation does not authorize independent tactical missions. Return to your duty station. Vega did not move. Sir, the certification requirement is administrative. My qualification scores exceed every certified sniper currently assigned to this theater. I said denied. Mercer's voice rose enough that heads turned throughout the operations center. You are support personnel. This is a combat operation. Those categories exist for a reason, and I will not throw them out because you watched some drone footage and drew lines on a map. Chen watched Vega's face. The younger woman's expression betrayed nothing, but her hands had curled into fists at her sides. After a long moment, Vega turned and walked out of the operations center without another word. Mercer exhaled and addressed the room. Give me options for accelerating the ground assault timeline. I want staging plans within the hour. Chen caught Patterson's eye and tilted her head toward the corridor. The command sergeant major followed her out. They found an empty office 2 doors down. Chen pulled up Vega's personnel file on her tablet and handed it to Patterson. Read the mission summaries, not the classification headers. The actual content. Patterson scrolled through the documents. His expression shifted from skepticism to something harder as he read. High-value target elimination in 4 separate denied areas. Precision fires supporting operations that officially never happened. Engagement distances that matched or exceeded any combat sniper on record. These missions are all listed as support operations, Patterson said, because someone decided they should be. Chen pulled up a second file. Look at the routing. Every time she was recommended for combat designation, the paperwork was rejected at the same level. Different officers, same result. Someone has been keeping her in support status deliberately. Patterson looked up. Why? Chen let the silence answer for her. Patterson handed back the tablet. His jaw was set in a way that Chen recognized from 20 years of watching senior NCOs prepare to fight battles that had nothing to do with enemy combatants. He walked back to the operations center and straight to Mercer's position. Colonel, I need a word. Mercer glanced up from the staging plans. What is it, Sergeant Major? Patterson kept his voice low enough that only Mercer could hear, but Chen saw the colonel's face redden as the conversation continued. She caught fragments. 12 Rangers. 36 hours. Qualified volunteer. Documented refusal. Mercer's response was sharp. I am following protocol, Sergeant Major. Combat opération requiert combat désignated personnel. That is not my opinion. That is regulation. Patterson's reply was quieter, but no less intense. You were telling me you would rather let 12 Rangers die than let a qualified sniper attempt a rescue because of an administrative designation that someone else assigned to keep her out of exactly these situations. Mercer straightened to his full height. I am telling you that my decision is final, and this conversation is over. Patterson held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then turned and walked to where Chun stood. Get division on secure comm, he said. General Morrison. Now, Chun moved to the communication station and began the connection protocols. Mercer watched from across the room, but did not interfere. Whatever authority he held did not extend to preventing a command sergeant major from contacting higher headquarters. The connection took 4 minutes. General Morrison's voice came through with the clarity of encrypted satellite relay. This is Morrison. What have you got? Chun laid out the situation in precise terms. 12 Rangers trapped with overlapping sniper coverage. Critical casualty with 36-hour window. Ground assault timeline of 72 hours minimum. Volunteer sniper with verified qualifications offering solo elimination mission. Request denied by Tactical Operations Commander citing administrative designation. Morrison's pause lasted 5 seconds. Who is the volunteer? Staff Sergeant Elena Vega, sir. Currently assigned support operations. 47 confirmed kills. Longest shot 2,100 meters. Another pause. And Mercer denied her based on her support designation. Yes, sir. His objection and reasoning are logged in the operations record. Morrison's voice carried the weight of a general officer who had seen too many good soldiers lost to bad decisions. Vega is authorized for immediate deployment. My authority. Log my override of Colonel Mercer's objection. I want the full record preserved. Understood, sir. The connection ended. Chun turned to find Mercer standing 3 feet behind her, his face pale with fury. She logged the authorization into the operations record, making sure every keystroke was captured. Then she keyed the internal comm and summoned Vega back to the operations center. Vega appeared within minutes, still wearing the expression of someone who had expected nothing and would accept whatever came. You are authorized, Chun told her. General Morrison's direct order. Mercer's objection is logged and overruled. Something flickered in Vega's eyes. She nodded once and moved toward the equipment staging area. Mercer intercepted her at the door. His voice was low but carried clearly in the quiet room. When you fail out there, and you will fail, remember that you did this to yourself. You could have stayed in your lane. Now every woman who won a combat role will have to explain why Elena Vega thought she was special and got 12 Rangers killed. Vega turned to face him. Her voice was steady. If I fail, Colonel, 12 Rangers die. That is the only thing that matters. Not your categories. Not your predictions. 12 lives. I suggest you start hoping I succeed, because right now, I'm the only option those men have. She walked out of the operations center toward the staging area, leaving Mercer standing in silence. Chun watched her go and began preparing the mission support package. In 36 hours, they would know whether Elena Vega was everything her record suggested, or whether Mercer had been right all along. The helicopter touched down for 6 seconds. Vega was out and moving before the skids settled fully, her boots hitting rocky ground as the Black Hawk lifted away into darkness. The rotor wash faded and silence closed around her like water filling a void. For kilometers to the target zone. 8 hours until dawn. 34 hours until Torres died and the mission became a recovery operation instead of a rescue. She moved through the darkness with her rifle across her back and her ghillie suit adding 30 pounds to her frame. The terrain was rough, broken hills, and dry creek beds that did not appear on standard maps. But she had memorized the drone imagery down to individual rock formations, and her feet found paths that her eyes could barely see. The eastern ridge rose ahead of her, a black mass against a sky full of stars. Her first overwatch position waited at the top, a natural depression between 2 boulders that would give her line of sight to 3 of the 8 sniper positions. From there, she could begin the sequence that existed only in her mind, 8 shots in precise order, each kill opening the angle for the next. She had covered 2 kilometers when she heard voices. Vega dropped to the ground and pressed herself into the shadow of a boulder. 30 meters ahead, flashlight beams cut through the darkness. An enemy patrol from men moving along the ridge trail that led directly to her planned position. She controlled her breathing and calculated. The patrol was between her and the optimal approach. She could wait for them to pass, but their route suggested they were heading to a checkpoint that would put them in position to spot her movement at dawn. She could engage, but 4 shots would alert every sniper in the valley and end the mission before it began. Third option: reroute east, circle wide, approach the ridge from a secondary position that added 90 minutes to her timeline. Vega began moving before the calculation finished. 90 minutes was costly, but survivable. Discovery was fatal. She ghosted through the rocks, giving the patrol a wide berth, her movements timed to coincide with their conversation and footsteps. They never knew she was there. They never knew that the woman who would kill 8 of their comrades passed within 50 meters of their position and vanished into the night like smoke. The alternate route was harder. Steeper grades, looser rock, fewer landmarks to navigate by. Twice she had to backtrack when the terrain became impassable. The 90-minute delay stretched toward 2 hours. Dawn began to gray the eastern horizon as she reached her position. The depression between the boulders was smaller than the drone footage had suggested, barely large enough for her body and her rifle. She wedged herself into the space and began the slow process of becoming invisible. Ghillie suit adjusted to break her outline. Rifle positioned with minimal exposure. Scope covers removed and lens angled to prevent reflection. Every movement deliberate, every adjustment calculated to leave no trace that human eyes could detect. 28 hours remaining. Torres was dying in a collapsed building while she lay motionless on a cold ridge, waiting for enough light to identify her first target. The sun cleared the horizon, and the valley below came into focus through her scope. Buildings and streets, and the skeletal remains of a city that had seen too much war. Somewhere down there, 12 Rangers were counting hours they did not have. Vega began her scan. Position 1 should be visible from here, an elevated rooftop 1,400 meters to the southwest. She swept her scope across the building, searching for the telltale signs of a prepared sniper position. Nothing. The rooftop appeared empty. Either her intelligence was wrong, or the shooter was better than she had anticipated. She expanded her search pattern, checking windows and shadows and every surface that could conceal a prone figure. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. Her window continued to shrink. Movement, not on the rooftop, but 1 floor below, in a window that should have been outside the optimal firing position. A spotter, adjusting his observation equipment, his silhouette visible for 3 seconds before he pulled back into shadow. Vega traced the angle from the spotter's position to the rooftop. There, a slight discoloration in the concrete where someone had constructed a hide site, the kind of patient preparation that took days to complete. The shooter was inside the structure itself, firing through a concealed port that was invisible from her current angle. She marked the position in her mind and keyed her radio. Whisper 6 to actual. Eyes on Tango 1. Concealed position, 1,400 meters. Ready to engage on authorization. Chen's voice came back. Whisper 6, you are authorized to engage at your discretion. Good hunting. A second voice cut into the channel before Chen finished speaking. Lieutenant Colonel Mercer, his tone flat and clinical. Logging mission clock at 28 hours. All communications will be recorded for after-action review. He did not wish her luck. He did not offer support or encouragement. He was watching and waiting and recording, building the case he would present when she failed. Vega turned off the part of her mind that cared about Mercer and his recordings and his predictions. The only thing that mattered now was the target 1,400 meters away and the 11 lives that depended on her making a shot that nobody believed she could make. She settled her breathing and began to wait for the moment when Tango 1 would give her the angle she needed. 8 shots. 8 kills. The count started now. 3 hours of stillness. 3 hours of watching a concealed position through her scope while the sun climbed and the shadows shortened and the wind shifted through patterns she tracked with each breath. Vega had learned patience in places that did not exist on official maps. She had learned that the shot was not the hard part. The hard part was everything that came before. The waiting, the calculating, the absolute control of every muscle and every thought until the moment arrived and the trigger broke and the round crossed the distance between hunter and target. The wind steadied. The light reached optimal angle. And 1,400 meters away, the shooter in position 1 shifted his rifle to track movement in the Rangers building. His head came into view for less than 2 seconds. It was enough. Vega exhaled half a breath and squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the round began its journey, dropping through the arc she had calculated across hours of observation. 1.4 seconds of flight time. 1.4 seconds where nothing existed except physics and trajectory and the absolute certainty that she had done everything right. The target dropped. No movement. No sound except the distant echo rolling across the valley. She was already moving. 200 meters east, a secondary position she had identified during her approach. The echo would give the enemy a general direction, but not a precise location. By the time anyone triangulated the sound, she would be somewhere else entirely. The enemy response came through her earpiece as Chun relayed intercepted radio traffic. Confusion, shouting, questions about what had happened and where the shot originated. But no coordinated response. No contes ni per proteicas. They were watching the Rangers, not each other, and they had no framework for an attack from behind. Vega settled into her new position and began scanning for Target 2. For kilometers away, Captain Marcus Holt pressed his eye to a gap in the concrete and tried to understand what he had just witnessed. The distant crack had reached him a full second after he saw the enemy position on the rooftop go still. One moment there was movement, the subtle shifting of a concealed shooter. The next moment there was nothing. His radio crackled with a voice he did not recognize. Tango 1 down. Holt keyed his handset. Viper 6 to Whisper 6. Say again your last. The response was calm and focused. Tango 1 eliminated. Moving to Tango 2. Who the hell are you? Holt asked. The radio went silent. Whoever was out there had already moved on to the next target. Torres stirred against the wall, his eyes finding Holt's face. Captain, what is happening? Holt shook his head. Someone is hunting them. I do not know who. He turned back to the gap and resumed watching. Somewhere in those hills, a sniper he had never met was doing what 3 helicopter crews and an entire tactical operations center had failed to accomplish. All he could do was wait and hope they finished the job. Vega identified Target 2 through her scope. Mosque Minaret, 1,650 meters to the northwest. A more difficult shot than the first, complicated by the narrow window the shooter had chosen as his firing port. She could see his rifle barrel extending through the gap, but his body was concealed behind centuries of stone construction. She calculated angles and holdover and the slight crosswind that had developed since her first shot. The window gap was perhaps 18 inches wide. She needed to place her round through that gap at a distance where her margin of error was measured in fractions of an inch. The shooter shifted position. His shoulder came into view for a moment as he adjusted his stance. Vega marked the rhythm of his movement, the pattern of his adjustments, the predictable humanity of a body that could not remain perfectly still for hours at a time. She waited through 2 more cycles. On the third, she fired. The round crossed 1,650 meters in just under 2 seconds. It passed through the 18-inch window gap and found the shoulder she had seen moving. The impact spun the target sideways, and a second later, he tumbled forward, his rifle clattering down the minaret's exterior. Tango 2 down, she reported. Moving to Tango 3. Chen's voice carried something that might have been wonder. Copy Whisper 6. 2 down, 6 remaining. Vega relocated again. Faster this time because the spotter for position 1 had survived her first shot and was now actively searching for her. She had seen him move to a secondary location after his partner fell, abandoning his observation equipment to take up a rifle of his own. He was making a mistake. Grief or anger or simple tactical error. He had positioned himself against the morning sky. His silhouette was visible for only moments at a time, but moments were all she needed. 1,200 meters. An easier shot than the first two. She found him in her scope, tracked his movement, and waited for him to pause. He stopped to scan the ridgeline, where her first position had been. He was looking in the wrong direction. He was looking for a ghost that had already moved on. Vega fired. The spotter collapsed. 3 down, she said into the radio. 5 remaining. The sun was climbing toward noon. 25 hours remained on Torres's clock. Half the enemy snipers were dead, and the other half had no idea where she was or how many shooters they faced. Vega checked her ammunition and began scanning for Target 4. The math was starting to work in their favor. She intended to keep it that way. Major Chun watched the intelligence feed scroll across her screen as enemy radio traffic spiked across multiple frequencies. The calm of the morning had shattered. 3 of their snipers were dead, and they knew something had gone terribly wrong. She keyed her headset. Whisper 6, be advised. Intercepts show significant enemy communication increase. They are aware of losses, but cannot identify shooter location or number. Multiple units requesting guidance. Vega's response came in a whisper. Copy. Moving to Tango 4 position now. Chun glanced across the operations center to where Mercer sat with his arms crossed, watching the mission clock and the communications log with the patience of a man waiting for vindication. 23 hours remained. 3 targets down. 5 to go. Patterson appeared at her shoulder. Was their response pattern? Confusion mostly, Chun said. They built their positions to watch the Rangers. They have no protocol for an attack from outside the perimeter, but they are learning. Intercepts suggest the remaining shooters are adjusting positions. Adjusting how? Pulling back from exposed firing ports. Consolidating into hardened locations. They're making themselves harder to hit. Patterson nodded slowly. She rattled them. Now they're going to make her earn every shot. On the ridge, Vega studied the building that held targets 4 and 5 through her scope. A reinforced structure, possibly a former police station, with thick walls and narrow windows. The 2 shooters had been positioned on separate floors when the mission began. Now they had pulled into a single room on the 2nd floor, their rifles withdrawn from the windows, their bodies invisible behind concrete and shadow. She scanned for angles. The front windows offered nothing. The side windows were blocked by an adjacent building. The rear of the structure faced a courtyard that would require her to descend from the ridge and approach through open ground. One option remained. A narrow alley ran between the target building and its neighbor to the east. If she repositioned 400 meters along the ridge, she might find an angle through that gap. A side window the enemy had not considered because the approach seemed impossible. She began to move. The new position took 20 minutes to reach. 20 minutes of careful movement across exposed terrain, every step calculated to avoid detection. When she settled into the rocky outcrop that gave her the angle she needed, her muscles burned with the effort of controlled motion. Through her scope, the alley resolved into focus. 12 feet wide, shadowed by the buildings on either side. And there, visible through a window that faced the narrow gap, the outline of a man holding a rifle. Sniper 4, 1,500 meters. The shot would thread through an opening barely wider than her scope's field of view. Vega calculated windage and drop. The breeze had shifted since her last shot, coming now from the southeast at perhaps 5 miles per hour. She adjusted her aim point and let her breathing slow to the rhythm that preceded every kill. The target shifted. His partner moved somewhere behind him, a shadow crossing the deeper shadows of the room. 2 men who thought they were safe because they had pulled back from the obvious positions. They had not considered that someone might find the angle they had dismissed as impossible. Vega fired. The round crossed 1,500 meters and passed through the narrow window. Sniper 4 dropped. His partner reacted instantly, not with panic, but with trained precision, throwing himself deeper into the building, away from any window, away from any angle that could reach him. By the time Vega had cycled her bolt, Target 5 had vanished into the structure's interior. Tango 4 down, she reported. Tango 5 is mobile, no shot available. He has gone to ground inside the structure. Chen's voice carried tension. Copy Whisper 6. 4 down, for remaining. Be advised, enemy is mobilizing ground forces to search for shooter. Intercepts indicate patrol deployment to your sector. Estimated 45 minutes until they reach your area. Vega processed this. Ground forces meant she could no longer rely on distance and concealment. They would sweep the ridge with numbers she could not match. She would have to move before they arrived. But moving meant abandoning her current position. It meant starting over, finding new angles, calculating new shots. Time she did not have. How long on Torres? She asked. 20 hours. Maybe less. 20 hours. 3 targets eliminated since her last check. 5 remaining, including 1 who had gone to ground, and 4 who were now adapting to her presence. She had 2 choices: withdraw to a safe position and wait for the patrol to pass, losing hours she could not afford, or accelerate her timeline, take risks she had been avoiding, and trust that speed could compensate for the loss of careful preparation. Torres did not have time for careful. Chun, Vegas said, I'm going to move faster. The shots will be harder. The margins will be tighter. But I cannot wait out a patrol and still make the window. Silence on the radio. Then Chen's voice, steady and clear. Understood, Whisper 6. We will keep you updated on patrol movement. Good hunting. Mercer's voice cut through. Logging decision to accelerate timeline against tactical protocols. Shooter is now operating outside recommended safety margins. Vega turned off her radio. She did not need his commentary. She did not need his documentation. She needed to find Target 6 before the ground patrol found her. She gathered her equipment and began moving down the ridge toward a position that would put her closer to the remaining snipers and closer to the danger that was converging on her location. 20 hours. 4 targets. 1 chance to get this right. The math was getting harder, but the mission remained the same. Sniper 5 had learned from his partner's death. He had burrowed into the rubble of the police station like a creature retreating into its shell, constructing a hide so deep within the debris that no conventional angle could reach him. Vega studied his position through her scope for 11 minutes before she found what she was looking for. A gap in the rubble, perhaps 4 inches wide, where the barrel of his rifle extended into open air. He had created a firing port so narrow that he could engage the Rangers while remaining invisible to any counter-sniper. No direct body shot was possible. The rubble formed a wall of concrete and twisted metal that would stop any round she could fire. The only piece of him exposed to the outside world was that rifle barrel, black steel catching the afternoon light through a gap that seemed impossibly small at 1,800 meters. She ran calculations that existed nowhere in any manual. Angle of incidence. Deflection probability. The physics of a high-velocity round striking hardened steel at precisely the right point. If she hit the barrel at the correct angle, the round would not simply ricochet away. It would transfer energy into the weapon, shattering the receiver, driving fragments back into the shooter's position. A theoretical shot, something discussed in ballistic seminars but never attempted in combat. The kind of shot that instructors described as mathematically possible but practically impossible. Vega adjusted her aim point to the precise spot on the exposed barrel where the physics suggested success. She controlled her breathing and let the crosshairs settle on a target smaller than her fist at nearly 2 kilometers. The wind died for 3 seconds. She fired. The round crossed 1,800 meters in just over 2 seconds. It struck the rifle barrel at the angle she had calculated, transferring kinetic energy through the steel. The weapon detonated in its owner's hands. Through her scope, Vega saw the rubble pile shift as debris flew outward from the concealed position. Dust rose in a cloud that obscured the gap where the rifle had been. When it cleared, there was no movement, no sign of life. The theoretical shot had become practical reality. Tango 5 eliminated, she reported. Unconventional method. Rifle destruction and fragmentation. Chen's voice carried something beyond professional acknowledgement. Copy Whisper 6. 5 down. 3 remaining. In the collapsed building 4 kilometers away, Captain Holt had been watching the enemy position through his scope when it happened. He had seen the distant muzzle flash first, a tiny spark on the ridgeline, so far away it seemed impossible that it could matter. Then, nearly 3 seconds later, the enemy position had erupted. Concrete dust and debris exploding outward from a structure he had assumed was impenetrable. His radio crackled with the same calm voice he had heard before. Tango 5 eliminated. Holt keyed his handset. Viper 6 to Whisper 6. What the hell was that? I saw the position explode. The response was brief. Rifle barrel shot. Fragmentation effect. Holt lowered his scope and stared at the radio in his hand. He had spent 15 years in the Rangers. He had worked with the best snipers in the world. He had never heard of anyone making a shot like that. Torres stirred against the wall. Captain, how many left? 3, Holt said. 3 left. Torres managed something that might have been a smile. Whoever is out there, I want to buy them a drink. Holt returned his eye to the scope. Get in line, Sergeant. On the ridge, Vega was already scanning for Target 6. The water tower rose above the surrounding buildings like a metal sentinel, its elevated platform providing the best overwatch position in the entire sector. The shooter there had a clear line of sight to the primary extraction route. Until he was eliminated, no helicopter could approach the Rangers. She measured the distance, 2,100 meters, the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range. At that distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds. Wind drift could push it meters off target. Atmospheric conditions could alter the trajectory in ways that were difficult to predict. She needed to get closer, 1,900 meters or less for a reliable shot. The patrol Chen had warned about was moving through the sector below her position. She could see their flashlights cutting through the shadows of the buildings, systematic sweeps working toward the ridge. 40 minutes had become 30. She was running out of time to reposition. Vega gathered her equipment and began moving down the slope. Each step took her closer to the patrol and closer to the water tower. The risk calculation had shifted. Distance from the patrol mattered less than distance to the target. She found a position 15 minutes later. A rocky outcrop on the lower ridge, partially concealed by scrub brush that had somehow survived the war. The water tower filled her scope, 1,800 meters now instead of 2,100. The shooter on the platform was disciplined. He moved rarely and never exposed more than necessary. But he had to observe. He had to watch the extraction route. And watching meant showing himself, however briefly. Vega settled into her new position and began the patient work of finding his pattern. Below her, the patrol lights drew closer. Behind her, the sun moved toward the horizon. Somewhere in a collapsed building, Torres was dying by degrees while his captain watched enemy positions fall one by one. 3 targets remaining. 18 hours on the clock. And the most dangerous phase of the mission was just beginning. She would find a shot. She always found a shot. That was what made her who she was. The patrol appeared without warning. Vega had been moving through a dry creek bed when 4 soldiers came around the bend 20 meters ahead. They were sweeping the terrain systematically, flashlights probing the rocks and shadows, rifles ready. There was no cover between her position and theirs. No time to retreat. No option except the one she had trained for but hoped to avoid. She calculated the geometry in a fraction of a second. 4 targets, 12 meters to the nearest. Her rifle was wrong for this distance. Her sidearm was already clearing the holster before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The first soldier saw movement and began to raise his weapon. Vega fired twice, center mass, and he dropped before his rifle reached horizontal. The second was turning toward the sound when her third round took him in the chest. The fourth round found a third soldier as he fumbled with his safety. 3 men down in less than 4 seconds. The fourth was faster than his companions. His rifle was up and swinging toward her when her 5th shot punched through his throat. He collapsed against the creek bank, his weapon discharging once into the dirt. Silence returned to the creek bed, for bodies lay in the dust. Vega's pistol was empty, slide locked back, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the evening air. She reloaded and listened. The single rifle shot from the dying soldier had echoed across the valley. If anyone was close enough to hear, they would come to investigate. Her position was compromised. The careful approach she had planned was no longer viable. Vega moved immediately, climbing out of the creek bed and pushing east along the ridge. She abandoned the optimal route to the water tower and took the fastest path that offered any concealment. Speed over stealth, distance over position. 15 minutes later, she found cover behind a cluster of boulders that overlooked the valley. Her breathing was elevated and her muscles burned from the rapid movement. She forced herself to slow down, to control the adrenaline that was still coursing through her system. Through her scope, the water tower rose against the darkening sky. She measured the distance and felt her stomach tighten. 50 meters, beyond the reliable range of her rifle. Beyond the envelope where skill and mathematics could guarantee a hit. At this distance, a gust of wind could push her around 2 meters off target. A slight error in her calculations could mean the difference between a kill and a miss that revealed her position. The patrol encounter had cost her the closer approach. She had no time to find a better angle. The sun was setting and darkness would make the shot impossible. She studied the wind. It had picked up since her last shot, blowing from the west at perhaps 8 miles per hour with gusts that rippled the scrub brush around her position. At 50 meters, that wind would push her bullet nearly 3 meters to the east during its flight time. Chen's voice came through her earpiece. Whisper 6, be advised. Radio traffic indicates patrol has not returned to checkpoint. Enemy may be aware of engagement. Increased activity in your sector. Copy, Vega responded. I have eyes on Tango 6. Suboptimal range. Taking a shot anyway. She settled into her position and began the calculations. Bullet drop at 50 meters. Windage correction for sustained 8-mile-per-hour crosswind. Air density at current altitude and temperature. The rotation of the Earth itself, which at this distance would affect the trajectory by centimeters that mattered. Her scope could not compensate for all of it. Mathematics could only approximate the chaos of a bullet traveling through atmosphere for nearly 3 seconds. The rest came down to something that could not be quantified. Instinct born from thousands of hours behind a rifle. Judgment refined through 47 kills that had taught her things no manual could capture. The shooter on the water tower moved. He was checking the extraction route, scanning for helicopter activity that had not come since the last failed attempt. His upper body appeared above the platform railing, silhouetted against the fading light. Vega adjusted her aim point. High and left. Compensation for drop and drift. A spot in empty air where the bullet would arrive at the same moment as its target. She fired. The round left her barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It climbed through the first 100 meters, then began its long descent toward the water tower. Wind pushed it east. Gravity pulled it down. The spinning projectile crossed 50 meters in 2.8 seconds, an eternity during which anything could change. The shooter on the water tower pitched backward and disappeared below the railing. Tango 6 down, Vega reported. The extraction route is clear. In the collapsed building, Hull heard the report and felt something loosen in his chest. He keyed his radio. Viper 6 to actual. Requesting immediate extraction. Northern route is open. Chen's voice came back immediately. Viper 6 extraction assets are spinning up. ETA 45 minutes. Hold your position. Holt looked at Torres, whose eyes had opened at the sound of the radio traffic. The sergeant's face was pale and slick with fever, but he managed a weak nod. 45 minutes, Holt told him. We're getting out of here. Torres closed his eyes. Tell whoever is out there I owe them my life. Holt turned back to the gap in the concrete and resumed his watch. Somewhere on that ridge, a sniper he had never seen was still working. 2 targets remaining. 2 obstacles between his rangers and home. He did not know who she was. He did not know how she was doing the impossible. But he knew that 12 lives depended on her finishing what she had started. The sun set over the valley. The mission continued in darkness. The last 2 snipers had survived by being better than their dead comrades. Vega studied their positions through her scope as the last light faded from the sky. They had abandoned their original locations and repositioned to sites that covered each other, mutually supporting fields of fire. If she engaged one, the other would have her location. If she moved against either, she would expose herself to the other. They had learned from 6 deaths. They would not make the same mistakes. In the Tactical Operations Center, Major Chen watched the mission clock tick past the 16-hour mark. Torres was running out of time. The extraction helicopters were holding at a staging area 20 kilometers away, waiting for confirmation that the final 2 snipers had been eliminated. Mercer's voice cut through the tension. "This has gone far enough." Chen turned to face him. "Sir." Mercer stood at the center of the room, his posture rigid with authority. "She has been operating for nearly 20 hours. She engaged a ground patrol and compromised her position. She is exhausted, exposed, and facing 2 shooters who have adapted to her tactics. I am recommending we abort and extract her before she becomes another casualty." Patterson spoke from across the room. "The mission is not complete, Colonel. The mission is a statistical impossibility at this point." Mercer moved to the communications station. "She got lucky 6 times. Luck does not hold forever. I am contacting General Morrison to recommend immediate abort." Chen watched him key the secure channel and request a connection. Morrison's voice came through within minutes, and Mercer laid out his case with the precision of a man who had been building his argument for hours. Fatigue factors, compromised position, adapted enemy tactics, unacceptable risk profile. Morrison listened without interruption. When Mercer finished, the general's response was brief. "Denied, Colonel. Staff Sergeant Vega has authorization to continue at her discretion. Your recommendation is logged for the record." The channel closed. Mercer stood motionless for a long moment, then returned to his observation post without another word. His objection was documented. His position was clear. When this ended badly, no one would be able to say he had not tried to prevent it. Chen keyed her radio. "Whisper 6, be advised. Colonel Mercier requested mission à bord." General Morrison denied. "You are authorized to continue. What is your status?" Vega's whisper came back through static. 2 targets remaining. Mutually supporting positions. I need to separate them. How? Working on it. Stand by. On the ridge, Vega lowered her radio and studied the terrain between her position and target 7. 300 meters of open ground, scattered rocks that offered minimal cover, a slope that would silhouette her against the night sky if she moved carelessly. Clouds were building to the west. Heavy formations that blocked the moonlight in rolling waves as they crossed the valley. She timed the intervals. 90 seconds of shadow, followed by 60 seconds of pale illumination. A rhythm she could use. She waited for the next cloud shadow to reach her position, then moved. The open ground passed beneath her in controlled bursts of movement. Run during darkness. Freeze during light. Each cycle brought her closer to the position she needed, a shallow depression that would give her angle on target 7, while keeping her concealed from target 8. The final cloud shadow carried her into the depression. She pressed herself against the cold earth and forced her breathing to slow. No movement from either enemy position. They had not seen her. Through her scope, target 7's location resolved into focus. A partially collapsed apartment building, upper floors destroyed by artillery, lower floors converted into a fortified position. She could see sandbags in the windows. She could see firing ports cut through the walls. But she could not see the shooter. She scanned the structure methodically. First window, empty. Second window, empty. Third window showed movement that resolved into a rifle barrel and part of a ghillie suit. She marked the position and kept scanning. Fourth window, another rifle barrel. Fifth window, a shape that might have been a shoulder. She counted 4 separate positions that showed signs of a sniper presence. Dummy positions. Target 7 had created multiple false hides to draw fire, to force her to reveal herself by engaging the wrong target. Only one was real. The others were decoys designed to survive a round and give away her location. Vega watched and waited. The real shooter would have to move eventually. He would have to adjust his position or check his field of fire or simply shift his weight against the cold. The dummies would remain static. Patience would reveal the truth. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The cloud cover thickened and steady darkness settled over the valley. In the fourth window, something changed. The rifle barrel moved. Not the subtle shift of a prop adjusting to wind, but the deliberate motion of a weapon being repositioned by human hands. Behind the barrel, a face appeared for just a moment as a shooter checked his scope. Target 7 confirmed. 1,500 meters. A clean shot through an open window at a target who thought his decoys made him invisible. Vega fired. The round crossed the distance in less than 2 seconds. Target 7 collapsed behind his sandbags and did not move again. She was already rolling to a new position when the return shot cracked past her head. Target 8 had been watching. Target 8 had seen her muzzle flash. And now Target 8 was hunting her with the same patience and precision she had used against his comrades. Tango 7 down, she whispered into her radio. Tango 8 has my position. He is engaging. Chen's voice was tight. Can you withdraw? Vega pressed herself against the rocks as another round impacted 3 feet from her head. Negative. He has me pinned. This is now a direct engagement. The sniper duel had begun. One-on-one. Hunter against Hunter. Somewhere in the darkness, the last enemy shooter was searching for her through his scope. Whoever moved first would die. Vega stopped breathing and became stone. The round impacted 18 inches from Vega's face. Stone fragments peppered her cheek, and she tasted blood where a shard had cut her lip. Target 8 was good. He had her general location dialed in and was walking his shots toward her position. She pressed deeper into the rocky depression and controlled her breathing. Movement meant death. The slightest shift of her body would create a silhouette that his scope would find. The only thing keeping her alive was absolute stillness and the darkness that concealed the precise outline of her form. Through her scope, she studied his position. A reinforced structure 1,700 meters to the northwest. Multiple windows, multiple firing ports, no clear indication of which one held the shooter. He had seen her muzzle flash when she killed Target 7. He knew her direction, but he did not know her exact position, and that uncertainty was the only advantage she had. Another round cracked past, this one 2 feet to her right. He was bracketing her, splitting the difference between his shots to narrow down her location. Professional technique. Patient execution. This was not an amateur with a rifle. This was a trained killer who understood the mathematics of counter-sniper operations. Vega stopped moving entirely. She stopped blinking. She let her body become part of the ridge, indistinguishable from the rocks and scrub that surrounded her. The cold seeped through her ghillie suit and into her bones. Her muscles screamed for relief from the frozen position. She ignored everything except the view through her scope. Hours passed. The moon rose and set behind the clouds. The temperature dropped until her breath would have fogged in the air if she had allowed herself to exhale fully. Neither sniper moved. Neither sniper fired. Chen's voice came through her earpiece, barely audible. Whisper 6, status check. Torres is at 8 hours. Repeat, 8 hours remaining. Vega did not respond. Any sound, any movement of her hand toward the radio could betray her position. She let the information settle into her mind and continued her watch. 8 hours. The sun would rise in 4. If she had not resolved this by dawn, the light would reveal her position and Target 8 would have the advantage. She needed to end this before the darkness faded. She studied his building through her scope, searching for any sign of human presence. The windows were black voids. The firing ports showed nothing. He was as disciplined as she was, as patient, as willing to let time pass in frozen stillness while he waited for his opportunity. But bodies were not made for permanent stillness. Muscles cramped. Positions shifted. Even the most disciplined shooter had to move eventually. Vega began counting. She marked the time in her head, tracking the minutes that passed without any sign of movement from the target building. 10 minutes. 15. 20. At 22 minutes, she saw it. A shadow in the third window, shifted by perhaps 3 inches. a shoulder adjusting against the cold, a body seeking relief from the strain of immobility. She marked the position and continued counting. 20 minutes later, the shadow shifted again. Same window, same subtle movement, a pattern born from physical necessity. Target 8 had to tell. Every 20 minutes, his discipline cracked just enough to create a 3-inch window of vulnerability. 3 inches at 1,700 meters. A target the width of her fist at a distance where the margin for error was measured in fractions. Vega waited. The next cycle would be her opportunity. She calculated the shot parameters, adjusting for the slight wind that had developed since her last engagement. Holdover for distance. Windage for the cross breeze. Compensation for the cold that had stiffened her muscles and slowed her reflexes. 18 minutes. 19. 20. The shadow in the third window shifted. 3 inches of movement. 3 inches of exposed shoulder. Vega fired. The round crossed 1,700 meters in just over 2 seconds. It found a 3-inch target and punched through fabric and flesh and bone. Target 8 jerked backward and disappeared from the window. No return fire came. No movement in the building. The last sniper had fallen. Vega keyed her radio with fingers that trembled from cold and adrenaline. Tango 8 eliminated. All targets down. Extraction route is clear. 4 kilometers away, Captain Marcus Holt heard the transmission and felt something break loose in his chest. He keyed his own radio with a voice that cracked despite his efforts to control it. Viper 6 to actual. Confirm all hostiles eliminated. Request immediate extraction. We have critical casualties. Chin's response came immediately. Viper 6 extraction assets are inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Prepare for dust-off. Holt lowered the radio and turned to face his rangers. 12 faces looked back at him, gaunt and exhausted and alive. Torres opened his eyes at the sound of approaching rotors. "Captain," the sergeant whispered. "Did we make it?" Holt gripped his shoulder. "We made it. All of us. Extraction is 15 minutes out." Torres closed his eyes. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer or a thank you to whoever had spent the night killing the men who wanted them dead. On the ridge, Vega lay in her position and listened to the helicopters approaching. Her body ached from hours of frozen stillness. Her hands shook as the adrenaline drained away. Blood from the cut on her lip had dried against her chin. 8 shots, 8 kills, 12 lives saved. She gathered her equipment and began the long walk to the extraction point. The mission was complete. The Rangers would live. And somewhere in a tactical operations center, Lieutenant Colonel Mercer was watching his predictions collapse into dust. The sun broke over the horizon as she reached the rally point. A new day, a day that 12 Rangers would see because she had refused to accept that the impossible was impossible. That was enough. That was everything. The Blackhawks came in low and fast, door gunners scanning for threats that no longer existed. Captain Holt stood in the gap of the collapsed building and watched them approach. The sound of their rotors the most beautiful thing he had heard in 3 days. He turned to his Rangers. Priority evacuation. Torres, Kimball, and Reyes on the first bird. Walking wounded on the second. Everyone else fills in where there is room. Move. His team responded with the discipline that had kept them alive through 72 hours of siege. They carried their wounded toward the open ground where the helicopters were settling, their movements quick but controlled. No one panicked. No one hesitated. They had waited too long for this moment to waste it with disorder. Torres was strapped to a stretcher, his face gray and slick with fever. The medic had done everything possible to keep the infection from spreading, but the sergeant needed surgery that could only happen in a hospital far from this valley. Every minute mattered now. The first helicopter touched down, and the crew chief jumped out to help load casualties. Holt grabbed his arm as Torres was carried past. Who was the sniper? The one who cleared the route. The crew chief glanced at him. Staff Sergeant Vega. Support operations. Holt stared at him. Support. The crew chief shrugged as he guided Torres' stretcher into the helicopter. That is what her patch says. I just fly the birds, Captain. You want details, ask command. The first helicopter lifted away with Torres and the other critical casualties. Holt watched it bank toward the field hospital and felt the weight of command settle back onto his shoulders. His people were getting out. That was what mattered. The questions about who had saved them could wait. The second helicopter loaded the walking wounded. Rodriguez limped aboard with his arm around Mills, both men too exhausted to speak. Chin helped Reyes secure the last of the equipment. One by one, the Rangers who had survived the impossible filed into the aircraft that would carry them home. Holt was the last aboard. He took a seat near the door gunner and watched the collapsed building shrink beneath them as the helicopter climbed. 3 days in that concrete tomb. 3 days of watching his people suffer while enemy snipers kept them pinned like insects on a board. And then someone had killed all 8 of those snipers. Alone, in a single night. Torres stirred on his stretcher as the helicopter reached cruising altitude. The morphine was wearing off and awareness was returning to his eyes. He found Holt's face and managed a weak gesture for him to come closer. Holt leaned in. "How are you feeling, Sergeant?" Like death warmed over. Torres coughed and winced. "What happened out there, Captain? I heard the radio traffic, but I could not follow it." "One sniper," Holt said, "took out all 8 positions. Solo mission. Shots I have never seen anyone make." Torres processed this through the fog of fever and medication. "What unit?" Holt paused. He thought about the crew chief's answer, about the implications of what he had learned. "Support operations." A woman. Torres's cracked lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Makes sense," he whispered. Holt frowned. "How does that make sense?" "Because the hard jobs always go to the people nobody is watching." Torres closed his eyes. The people they stick in categories because it is easier than admitting what they can do. The helicopter flew on toward the field hospital. Below them, the valley where they had nearly died faded into the distance. Somewhere down there, the bodies of 8 enemy snipers lay in their positions, killed by someone who the Army had decided belonged in support operations. Holt thought about that as they flew. He thought about the shots he had witnessed through his scope, the impossible angles and impossible distances. He thought about the calm voice on the radio, announcing each kill with the same professional detachment. Tango 1 down. Tango 2 down. All the way to 8. He had spent 15 years in the Rangers. He had worked with the best shooters in the world, and he had never seen anything like what Staff Sergeant Vega had done in that valley. Support operations. The words felt like a lie now. A convenient fiction that let people pretend they knew what someone was capable of based on a patch and a designation. Torres was right. The hard jobs went to the people nobody was watching. And Vega had done the hardest job of all without anyone watching her do it. At the extraction point 3 kilometers from the collapsed building, a dusty vehicle waited at the edge of the road. Vega climbed into the passenger seat and set her rifle between her knees. The driver, a specialist from the motor pool who had been told nothing except to pick up a passenger at these coordinates, glanced at her ghillie suit and the dried blood on her face. "Rough night?" he asked. Vega looked out the window at the valley where she had spent the last 20 hours. 12 Rangers were flying to safety. 8 enemy snipers would never hurt anyone again. And she was riding back to base in a truck with a driver who did not know her name. She never answered the specialist's question. She did not need to. The truck pulled away and she disappeared into the morning, alone with the knowledge of what she had done and the certainty that the people who mattered would never see her face. That was how it worked for people in support operations. That was about to change. General Morrison sat in his office at division headquarters and reviewed the mission log for the 3rd time. Every communication was there. Every decision documented. Every objection preserved in the official record exactly as he had ordered. He closed the file and looked up at the 2 officers standing before him. Colonel Mercer stood at rigid attention, his face carefully blank. Major Chun waited beside him, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "Colonel," Morrison said, "you formally objected to Staff Sergeant Vega's deployment. You attempted to abort the mission while it was in progress. You stated on record that her failure would set women in combat roles back 20 years. Is that accurate?" Mercer's jaw tightened. "I made tactical recommendations based on my assessment of the situation, sir." "Your assessment." Morrison opened the file again. 8 confirmed kills in under 12 hours. Longest shot at 2050 meters. Shots that our ballistics experts are calling unprecedented. A rifle barrel deflection kill that has never been documented in combat before. 12 Rangers extracted alive because of her actions. That was the situation you assessed as a failure waiting to happen. Mercer said nothing. There was nothing to say. Morrison closed the file. Your objection is logged. Your attempt to abort is logged. Your comments about women in combat are logged. All of it will be reviewed by a formal board. You are relieved of tactical operations command effective immediately. Dismissed. Mercer saluted and walked out of the office. His career was not over yet, but everyone in the room knew how the review would end. Forced retirement. A quiet exit that would keep the ugliest details out of the official record while ensuring he never commanded anything again. Chen remained at attention. Morrison gestured for her to stand at ease. Major, I want you to pull Staff Sergeant Vega's complete personnel file. Every assignment, every evaluation, every recommendation for combat designation that was denied. I want to know how a shooter with her record ended up classified as support operations. Chen nodded. Sir, I have already begun that review. Her file shows a pattern. Every time she was recommended for a combat sniper designation, the paperwork was rejected at the same administrative level. Different officers over 3 years, but the same result. Someone was deliberately keeping her out of combat roles. Find out who. Morrison leaned back in his chair. And find out if there are others like her. Qualified shooters who got buried in support designations because someone decided they did not fit the profile. Yes, sir. The review took 2 weeks. Chun presented her findings to a board that included Morrison and 3 other general officers. Vega's record was laid out in full. 55 confirmed kills across 4 deployments. Engagement distances that matched or exceeded any combat sniper in the theater, mission success rates that were statistically impossible to ignore. The board questioned why she had ever been classified as support. Chen's answer was simple. Qualified female snipers have been systematically routed away from combat designations by officers who did not believe women belonged in those roles. Vega was not an isolated case. She was part of a pattern that stretched across multiple commands and multiple years. Command Sergeant Major Patterson testified to what he had witnessed in the Tactical Operations Center. Mercer's dismissal of Vega's qualifications. His prediction that she would fail. His attempt to abort the mission while she was actively saving lives. Patterson's words were measured, but his meaning was clear. This was not about tactics. This was about prejudice dressed up in protocol. The board's recommendations came down 2 days later. Mercer was offered early retirement with full benefits, an outcome that satisfied no one but avoided the spectacle of a court-martial. 3 other officers identified in Chen's review received formal reprimands. A new policy was issued requiring that sniper qualification be based solely on demonstrated skill, with administrative designations prohibited from affecting combat assignments. The ceremony for Vega was small. A conference room at division headquarters, a handful of officers, no press. Morrison pinned the silver star to her uniform while Chun read the citation aloud. 8 confirmed kills in a single operation. Engagement distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Unconventional techniques that expanded the documented capabilities of precision marksmanship. 12 lives saved through extraordinary skill and courage under fire. Vega stood at attention throughout the reading. Her face showed nothing. When Morrison shook her hand, she thanked him quietly and stepped back. The door opened, and Captain Marcus Holt walked in. He had requested permission to attend, to personally thank the woman who had saved his team. Morrison had granted the request over Vega's objection. Holt crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He was taller than she was, broader, with the build of a ranger who had spent 15 years in combat units. She looked up at him without expression. Staff Sergeant, Holt said, I watched you work through my scope. I saw shots that I did not believe were possible. My people are alive because of what you did. Vega nodded. I was doing my job, Captain. Holt studied her face. The enemy set a trap that should have been perfect. 8 snipers covering every angle. How did you know they would not be watching each other? Vega met his eyes. because everyone was so focused on trapping you that they forgot to watch their own backs. She paused. It is the same mistake people make with me. They look at the patch and the designation, and they think they know what I am capable of. They never consider that the categories might be wrong. Holt absorbed this. The room was silent around them. They will not make that mistake again, he said finally. Vega allowed herself a small smile. No, they will not. She turned and walked out of the conference room, past the officers who had doubted her and the ones who had believed, past the paperwork that had tried to define her and the mission that had proved the paperwork wrong. Outside, the sun was bright and the air was warm. She had 8 more kills on her record and a medal on her chest, and nothing had changed about who she was. She was still the woman who made the shots that mattered. She always had been. Now the people who needed to know finally understood. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been put in a category that did not fit? Have you ever had someone look at you and decide what you were capable of before you had a chance to show them? Drop a comment and tell me about a time when you proved them wrong. Because everyone has that story. Everyone has that moment when the people who underestimated them had to watch their assumptions fall apart. Staff Sergeant Elena Vega walked into the sunlight and disappeared into the ordinary world where no one would recognize her face. That was fine with her. The people who mattered knew what she had done. That was enough.